What is going on, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of Your Requests, the segment on my channel where you guys leave me recommendations for movies to check out. And I really just want to say thank you to each and every one of you. I've done quite a few of these so far, and I'm loving it. I still have a big list of movies that a ton of you have requested. And if you're interested in me watching a film that you'd like me to review, please leave it down in the comments below and I'll add you into my rotation. There's been some people that have asked for more than one movie, and to make it fair, I'm trying to cycle it through to where, like, if I've already covered a movie you've asked me to do, just to kind of push it back later in the rotation so that everybody can at least get one early on. But it's really awesome for me because, as I've said before, I release a review a day every day of the year. I watch a ton of movies, and a lot of times I get really streamlined into what I'm checking out. Obviously new release movies, but then like I do my A24 segment, my Neon segment, all of these different things that I do on the channel. So it's really cool for you guys to essentially say, just watch this. And a lot of times I don't know anything about the movie, and this is one of those times. I've heard this movie listed in like the most disturbing and deeply saddening films of all time, but aside from that, I knew nothing about this movie before I went in to watch it. So this was a complete and total blind watch for me, and the film I'm going to be discussing with you today is Lilya Forever. Lilya Forever is directed by Lukas Moodysson. 16-year-old Lilya and her only friend, the young boy Volodya, live in Russia, fantasizing about a better life. One day, Lilya falls in love with Andrei, who is going to Sweden, and invites Lilya to come over and start a new life. So I was really excited to watch this movie. Like I said, this was really a blind watch for me. I've never seen a trailer for this. I've heard movies that it's been compared to before, which gave me somewhat of a context of what I was in for. And I really enjoyed this movie. I very much appreciate it. I don't necessarily think that it gutted me emotionally as much as it does other people. And that's not to say that I don't think what is being depicted is gutting, because the movie is incredibly depressing. I just think whether it be stylistically, some of the choices in the editing and the pacing of the film, that some of the more like harrowing ideas that the film conveys didn't gut me as much as they do in a lot of movies that have similar subject matter, especially when I was thinking about this in comparison to like Fire Walk with Me, which isn't necessarily the same thing, but there's a lot of themes that sort of resonate between the two, and how Fire Walk with Me makes me cry every time I watch it. In this movie in particular, like, I felt emotions in moments, but it never really moved me to tears at any particular time. And I'll talk about that as I break the movie down for you today. So the beginning of the film, we are introduced to Lilya, who is a 16-year-old girl that lives at home with her mother and her mother's new boyfriend. And her mother confronts her and says, hey, we're moving to the United States of America. And she's getting super excited because she can't stand where she lives in Russia. She doesn't want to be there anymore. And so she's like, I finally get to go to America. She tells all these people at her school that she's leaving, one of the friends that she's close to. And she gets back home, and her mother essentially tells her, I don't want you anymore. You're not coming to America. So you're going to stay here in this apartment, and I'm going to send you money every month, and you're just going to have to try and make it on your own. And Lilya is completely and totally distraught by this, and her mother gets in a car and leaves for the airport and leaves her alone. And her aunt eventually shows up, says, you're not living here anymore. We can't afford this place, and moves her into this complete and total dump of an apartment that's decrepit and falling apart. And so she's forced to move in there. She starts struggling in school, and eventually she gets involved with this girl who accuses her of prostitution, even though that girl is the one who's actually engaging in prostitution, which then gives the entire people of the community the wrong impression of Lilya. And she's isolated, and her only friend is this young boy, Volodya, who she spends all of her time with. And the entirety of the film is these two unlikely characters just trying to survive their lives in this area in Russia. So, like I said, despite some of the issues that I had with this movie, I still really enjoyed it. For starters, the performances in this movie are incredible, especially from our two main characters. The actress who plays Lilya is phenomenal in this movie. She has to go through a lot emotionally, and I think like just kind of showcasing the really extreme emotions early on. Like, she's incredibly distraught and upset at what is occurring around her, and then as things progressively amp up and get worse and worse, she sort of just becomes numb to everything happening around her, and so she becomes a little void of of expression towards the end of the movie. Like we could see it when it really gets her to a breaking point, but a lot of times she's like, what can I do? Like I can't get out of this particular circumstance. And I just thought that her performance was really mesmerizing. I also think the young actor who plays Volodya does a really great job. And they have a very unlikely friendship, but they're both going through very similar hardships in different ways. Volodya's dad is incredibly horrible to him. He's very abusive physically. He's like throwing things at him, treating him awful. And so he's also experiencing a really rough home life. And it's just two young kids dreaming of a better life for themselves. And I think that the performances really add to that. This movie felt almost like Von Trier's Dancer in the Dark, or like some of those Dogma 95 movies, like the way it's shot, very rough around the edges. But I think it gives it a more realistic quality when you shoot films like that. It almost felt like it was shot on like a VHS camcorder. And I'm not saying that in a negative way whatsoever. It like has this gritty, raw feel that makes it seem like you're watching something you shouldn't be. Like you're really just watching someone's life play out in front of you in a very raw and authentic way. And I really liked that about this movie. I think it's one of the really great things that it has working for it. There's also a really interesting choice of music in this film that I think work really well. Like I think the movie opened with a Rammstein song, and it really got me into it immediately, like what's gonna happen next. And there's some interesting musical choices throughout the entire runtime. I really like in the third act, without giving too much away, it goes a little bit into the fantastical realism territory. And what I like about it moving into the fantastical realism territory is it reminds you that these are kids. And that's what makes this movie a really difficult watch, is this is horrible things happening to children. And I was reading after the movie was over that this character is based on real life events to someone, I can't remember who it was exactly, and issues that were occurring in this part of the world, which makes a lot of sense because the movie starts to talk a little bit about sex trafficking and rape and abuse and all of these very intense subject matter. And what happens in this movie as you're watching it is you just keep reminding yourself, like, this is a child that is experiencing this, someone who has been abandoned by their parents, that the system is not going to take care of them, and that they have to fend for themselves. And it's truly heartbreaking to just like watch a kid be put through this. And some of it is very extreme, and you're watching it and you're like, okay, this is really like worst case scenario, which in one way I could say is the director really trying to just elicit a reaction out of you. But if it's based off of real events, I can forgive it. Like some of it I was like, okay, you're really taking this into like the worst of the worst territory. And like I said early on in the review, my biggest like issue I guess that I had with this movie is that for being about like such awful subject matter, like really just gutting and harrowing material, a lot of times in the movie when I found myself being like, man, normally in a movie like this I would be like welling up with tears by now and just really overwhelmed emotionally. Like I said, Fire Walk with Me, a movie that has some similar ideas when it comes to Laura Palmer's character and the abuse that she faces and the just really disgusting reality of the situation that she experiences. It hits me to where I cry almost every time. And I found myself feeling emotion in this movie, but not like consumed by it with how just like disturbing things are. And maybe like someone could argue that you become numb as the character does towards the end when you're watching it be repeated, because the first few times it's like really harrowing to where you're like, God, I'm disgusted. But like something about, I don't know if it was the editing style or the way they choose to approach it, I was like, this is terrible, but it wasn't impacting me emotionally in a way that I felt like was going to resonate with me long after the movie was over. And I don't discredit the performance or the cinematography. It's just one of those things that's like with me. I'm not 100% sure what it was that didn't fully sit with me about this movie. But regardless of that little bit of qualm, I think the movie is still really well made, and I think it's very effective. And maybe on a different day it would hit me harder than it did this time around. Maybe it's just where my head was at the time of watching the movie, but I still really enjoyed it as much as you can enjoy a movie about this dour and depressing of subject matter. And I think that if you're into this kind of movie where it's kind of of exploring the worst side of the human condition and like horrible things that real people actually experience, I think it's definitely worth checking out for that reason. So have you seen Lilya Forever? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. I thought this movie was really well made and very effective, and especially the performances, they were very good. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.